Hello and welcome to episode 16 of the Note to File podcast, a collection of interviews, best practices, and candid commentary for clinical research sites. If you're a fan of the podcast, please ask that you rate, review, and subscribe. I'd really like to hear more from the community about what kind of topics you'd like to see covered in the podcast. I'd appreciate any feedback you guys can give. Our guest today is Jesyln Atanu. She is a very dedicated research professional based in Houston, Texas. Her expertise ranges from patient recruitment to working as a CRA, coaching and mentoring clinical researchers, and training research staff on key subject matters. She currently runs a clinical research service, HTex Clinical. They assist research sites in meeting their recruitment goals by providing them with protocol-specific patient recruitment and retention consultation. In this episode, we cover specialization versus generalizing, the importance, again, of networking within the clinical research community, as well as just retaining a certain level of openness as you move throughout your career and how that can really benefit you. This has been one of my favorite conversations to have. So without further ado, Jeslyn Atanu. All right, Jeslyn, thanks so much for coming on. You're in Houston, is that right?
That's correct. Thank you, Brad, for having me.
Absolutely. I imagine Houston in August is not a lot of fun.
Yeah, it's pretty much burning hot out here. We're in the high 90s during the day, and at nights, maybe if we get lucky, low 80s.
Right. Yeah. Doesn't cool down a whole lot.
No. I mean, we have some bipolar days where we have a hot summer in the mornings, and by the end of the day, it's a randomly cold night. But for the most part, it's just burning hot.
Right on. Yeah, I lived in Austin for a little while, and I don't miss the heat. I'm not too far. I'm only, middle of Oklahoma, so I'm not too far from you, but it's not, we don't get that heat. So thank goodness for that.
Oh yeah, you should thank God, because it's not fun.
Well, again, thank you so much for coming on. And sort of the first question I start with everyone is, tell me a little bit about how you got into clinical research. It's always a kind of a fun little way to break the ice, I think.
Yes, it is. And it's more exciting to realize that there are more than one ways to get into the industry, and everyone's path is different. But for me, I started off working as an Epic consultant. And while I was in Epic, I actually supported a few departments that were involved in clinical research. That definitely piqued my interest, and I spoke with a few colleagues of mine that actually were CRAs, and then I began researching the industry. So once I got as much knowledge as I could get about the industry, I began to start seeking opportunities for myself, and I started off by being a patient recruitment for research sites. I then grew into a research coordinator position at a site where I took the initiative to start performing other duties, including performing data coordination, as well as some basically in-house CRA duties as well. So that really was the start and bridge into my current career in clinical research.
No, that's awesome. That's a great way to get in. I think everybody values patient recruitment. That's something that pretty much every site needs more of. Mm-hmm. So kind of on that front, I'm curious to know, do you have any sort of tips? I've used a lot of different EMR systems, and they're pretty much all overwhelming to try to get in and start pre-screening patients. Like what's maybe like a sort of generic tip you'd give somebody who's having to go through EMR records?
So, I mean, I don't think there is a better way or a worse way. I think it's just a question of just looking more at focusing more on the inclusion-exclusion criteria. And based on that is start streamlining the people you're looking at. So when you're going through the different EMR records, it's more of a question of going through a checklist that I would hope you have created based on the inclusion-exclusion, seeing if that patient meets that guide or meets that criteria. And there are certain places, depending on the EMR you're using, that you can easily go to find those specific information. But basically, it's just knowing what the inclusion-exclusion criteria is, and based on the EMR that you're utilizing, knowing where to go to find the specific details that you can use to possibly recruit that patient into your study.
Yeah, so really just sort of learning your EMR so well that you sort of know the tips and tricks so that you're not wasting too much time on each patient. You want to be able to get to the information you need as quickly as possible without necessarily having to read 100% of everyone's chart,
Exactly.
before you realize, oh, okay, well, they don't qualify. I just spent 30 minutes looking at this chart and they don't qualify.
Yes, exactly. It's that whole begin with the end in mind. And if you don't know what your end goal is from the beginning, then you are going to basically add more time to what you're doing that you need to. So yes, definitely begin with the end in mind. And depending on the facility or the site that you're working in, when you typically have a new EMR, you get training or at least get some kind of consultation, a person who's present to train you. So knowing that this is what you do, you start asking those specific questions so they can help you navigate the system to get what you need out of it.
There you go. Just go in with a strategy. Don't just go with a shotgun approach, right?
Yeah, definitely not. There's just a time and place for it, but nah, not for
That's
this
not it, right?
particular avenue.
Right. No, it makes perfect sense. So tell me a little bit about what you're doing now.
So, that's an intense question, actually. Um, so right now, I'm a clinical training specialist. I train clinical researchers and I offer career coaching to new, aspiring and transitioning clinical researchers as well. I am a lead CRA at the SCS and I run a patient recruitment and retention service.
So you're a busy lady, is what you're saying.
Pretty much. So, I mean, I'm talking about easily 12-hour days on a good day.
Sure. Well,
So
there are worse
it's
problems to have than having that much to do. So that's good.
That's true. I mean, the only other alternative is to sit on the couch and watch TV all day, which can be fun, but
True.
doesn't get you anywhere.
So do you train people at the site level at this point?
Yes, I do. So it depends on whom it is that I'm working with. I definitely have AMC that I'm working with, and I train their staff there based on their specific needs. And then for the sites I consult with, depending on their needs as well, I train them according to what they need and require of me.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. So do you, I guess sort of as a sort of philosophical question, do you see or have a preference as to how sites operate as far as having where everybody does everything, or do you see more specialization across the roles at these sites, or is it really just everything in between?
It's a combination of both, or like you said, everything in between. In terms of which is best, it's seemingly hard to make a choice, but I definitely think having a well-rounded individual working in your site is usually the best bet. So having a person cross-train in other activities is definitely beneficial to the site as well as the employee as well. But depending on where or the facility, there are places where it is very segregated. There is, if you're a clinical research coordinator, all you do is coordination. If you're a clinical data, all you do is clinical data and so on. And there are some very, very, very niche few that just kick everything all on one person, which pretty much drives them insane.
yeah, you can't maintain that for very long. Yeah, I mean,
Oh
there's
no.
obviously a lot of benefit to people who understand the industry from beginning to end and have a really well-rounded vision of what they're doing. But it's like you say, I think the larger the institution you work in, the less likely you see that as a sort of operating principle.
Yes.
You really start to see the people who are niched down to do one thing, which everywhere I've seen that eventually creates, disconnects in understanding, and it's just they don't seem to operate as integrated as places where everybody kind of knows what's what.
Exactly. And again, that's a bit of a struggle that from a holistic view, people will argue against before, is that there's a place to having a person just focus on one task. It does have its place. But at the end of the whole situation, the end goal is if you have a person who's just so niche and focused on one single part of it, there stands that chance of a disconnect. And you have, if for whatever reason you lose an employee or someone, just can't be in the office, then you have a break in the chain. And how are you able to keep your practice running when you have the one person who knows how to, do clinical data? that person's out sick or that person finds another job, then you're stuck. What do? The other people who are not trained, they're not equipped, they have no knowledge of that. So
Right.
it's kind of a double-edged sword. There's a good in it and there's the bad of it.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely right. And I've seen that time and time again. Yeah, your regulatory person leaves, nobody else knows how to manage all the IRB submissions, and then you're kind of screwed for a while.
Yeah.
So even if you are an institution that works in a very specialized way, it makes sense to cross train people as much as possible, so that at least, even if you're not working on everything all the time, at least you have a general understanding.
Yeah. So again, with that, I'm not certain what the different entities will have as a reason for not cross-training their staff, or not having people have a more holistic knowledge of the entire research process. But one of the main things I see is from the entity or the company side is the concern of training people and then they up and leave. And then it's like all the time and investment you put into that person, you're gone. So I think that's a worry that is out there. And then from the people who work there, there's that almost quiet, I'm trying to secure my job security. So there's a lot working against that whole being cross-trained and having each professional within your industry fully equipped to be able to do more than what they're capable and hired on to do.
Yeah, no, I think that touches on two kind of important points in the industry. Like, one is that I think a lot of site level, or sites, I guess, even, don't necessarily invest in their employees the way that they should.
Yeah.
And it's that double-edged sword of, you want to train people well enough to leave, but treat them well enough that they'll stay.
Perfectly said.
So if you really buy in to it, don't just pay it lip service, but buy in, I mean, you'll end up with loyal, happy employees.
Yes.
If you give them that empowerment to learn and to grow in their careers. But yeah, on the flip side of that is that everything is so sort of siloed. You end up with all these gatekeepers who, they don't want to teach you, because then you might come after their job. They might be at risk at that point. So it's unfortunate. That probably holds up a lot of progress across not just sites, but clinical research in general.
Definitely. I definitely had to encounter that as well personally. I actually had both sides of the table. I had one employee who was just a wealth of knowledge, and she definitely gave me the insights I needed to be able to work successfully at that site. I had another employee who basically she was kind of like the armed forces of the site. It was like I had to break into Fort Knox to get any kind of information out of her. And it was literally I don't want you to take my job. And in my head, I kept thinking, I don't want your job.
Right.
I want to be able to do my job successfully and help the site be successful. I don't want your job.
Right.
So it was a very interesting moment to where I had to repeatedly tell her that. And that didn't make a world of difference. So I just had to learn on my own, which is the irony of it is you don't have to teach a person. If a person wants and really needs to learn what they need to learn, they will get that knowledge. So either you teach them willingly or you give them the push to go out and learn that information on their own, but it's going to get gotten.
No, that's absolutely right. It's either way, they're gonna figure it out one way or the other.
Exactly right.
But again, like we talked about, I think for whatever reason, that's a sort of overwhelming sentiment in our industry, is that, again, people don't want to collaborate for some reason. Well, we kind of know why,
Yeah.
but again, it just seems so strange to me that there's just such a lack of collegial relationships. I really do believe, a rising tide lifts all ships. We can all succeed together rather than create these sort of little bottlenecks and silos. So it's good to see there's other people out there that are, sort of fighting the good fight to bring everybody together. So that's awesome. So what are any other challenges or issues you faced as you've sort of moved throughout your career? It seems like you've come up pretty fast. Was your first research experience sort of in the last 3 or 4 years, probably?
Yes. And that's the direct experience. Prior to that was more of knocking and attempting and learning. So I don't count those years where I was literally struggling to get into the industry. I just count more of when I actually started doing some sort of work in the industry. So that's where I sought counseling from. But prior to that was definitely a lot of rejection, a lot of hearing no's, a lot of what basically every clinical researcher that is facing right now. So there were years or time where it was just no, 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 rejection after rejection. And all I really had was just the desire to get in. And I refocused my mind to while I am trying to get in, is what can I learn? And I focused on learning as much as I could while I was trying to get in.
Yeah, and I think that's what a lot of people don't understand too, is I think this isn't an industry that's unlike any other. It's just a grind. You just have to keep going and going and going and making phone calls and
Oh,
making emails and knocking on doors, and eventually you will succeed if you are, dynamic and persistent. Absolutely. No, that's something I think that doesn't get said enough, probably. Because I think it's seen as a more academic field in some ways, but really it's got a lot of the same components as, sales or anything else. It's just go, 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 keep going.
Yeah,
No,
I agree.
that's awesome. What are some best practices, that you would share with other research sites? I'm kind of curious to know what your training philosophy is. I always struggle with training new research coordinators, people who come in sort of completely cold to the field. I think that, obviously experience is the best teacher, but it's hard to sort of distill that experience down into a short amount of time. It just seems like it takes a really long time to train people well.
Yeah. So I think with that, it's just more of knowing the person that you're training. And yes, it comes with a time factor into it, but it's just knowing the person that you're training. And that does help you know how to train them. So one thing that I've had to learn even as I train is the whole training process is not about you. So you have to be open to who you're training and how best you can train to them. So there are different people who learn differently. If it's someone who learns better by actively doing, or if it's someone who learns better by reading. But basically, it just really boils down to focusing on whoever you're training, how they can learn the best. But what I think is the best practice for clinical research sites in particular is to become more aware that you are as strong as your weakest link. And the reality is what you put in is what you're going to get out. And why I make that statement is because what I've seen more often than not is that CRCs are overwhelmed with more studies than they can handle. And CRCs are often tasked with added pressure of recruiting, research patients into these studies. And one thing sites don't take into account is that they need to realize that they position their employees for success or failure. And the best practice I will share with them is that they need to start actively listening to their research staff and provide them with the help that they need.
Yes, I could not agree more. That is well said. I literally have nothing to add to that. I think the fact that you're coming in with some sort of like emotional intelligence with the people that you're dealing with is very smart. A lot of people try to sort of fit this square peg into the round hole, and you can't do that.
Yeah.
Everybody is different. You got to be dynamic and be able to sort of read that situation enough to train people, because again, everyone responds differently. So again, that's amazing advice. No, that's amazing.
Yeah, definitely. And the thing is that, or let me put it this way, with research sites, the two biggest issues are number one, recruiting and retaining patients. And they put that pressure on the coordinators. And when you have a coordinator who's not equipped or not trained to be able to do that, or it's just not their natural disposition to be able to do that, they are literally in a position to fail. When you bring a new employee into your site and you don't train them well, or you train them the way you would understand, you've not done them any justice, and you end up firing a really good, potentially great asset for your site. So I think that's one of the main reasons why there's a lot of issues with getting jobs in clinical research is the lack of adequate training and positioning people to do the one thing they're not able to do, which more often than not is having people recruit patients when that's not what they're capable of doing. So those are reasons why I started doing a lot of what I do, which is HTex Clinical, where I help slice, recruit, and retain patients for their studies. And then I started coaching and mentoring aspiring and new clinical researchers for the field, just to help solve that need, because I know not a lot of people are capable of training people the way they need to. And a lot of people need that to be able to be successful in their job.
Yeah, no, again, I've seen that time and time again. I think it goes back to sort of the culture that people are building around their sites.
Yes.
Yeah, and if you don't value people enough to invest in helping them succeed, then they're not going to.
Exactly.
Or they'll go succeed somewhere else where they do get the resources, or they'll do like you do, or like I've done, and go start their own company where they can be successful and help other people be successful
That's
too.
exactly.
And I'm encouraged to see more people with that attitude. I think again that's been just somewhat lacking across the industry. So no, that's a beautiful sentiment. I love that you have that as sort of top of
Thank
mind.
you. And I'm glad to have a like-minded individual like yourself who's able to do that just as much as the next person. So thank you as well for that.
I try. What are some resources you use that you'd share with other people in clinical research? Is there anything in particular you find to be just sort of indispensable to what you do?
Keeping it short is network and acquiring knowledge. So one of my favorite quotes is your network and knowledge is power. That's actually two of my favorite quotes. But what I personally always strive to do is to consistently engage and network with other professionals in and outside of the industry. So I am not just pigeonholed to who I know. I'm actively just seeing other people and meeting them, engaging with them, and not reaching out to them because I want something from them, but just to genuinely connect with them and just learn through that whole process of engaging with them. And then in terms of knowledge, I keep learning as a goal. I'm always like reading and learning, listening to podcasts like Note to File, like the Clinical Trials Guru. I literally listen to as much as I can. And even on topics and different information that I already know, I still listen to that information again, just because when you listen to things, you don't hear 100% of what is being said. And there are lots of key information that you could have missed. So by listening to certain things on replay or reading certain things on replay, you catch one or two insightful things that you've missed the first or second time, if you do read it the second time, that you may have missed. So definitely I keep learning. I keep looking for avenues to learn more, to hear more, and to engage with other people outside of myself and outside of the industry.
No, that's beautiful. I think if people follow those instructions, I mean, you can't help but be successful. The more you can be network, and that makes you it's about being resourceful, So if you don't know something, how do you find out? Well, a great way is to talk to somebody who's been there and done it.
Exactly.
And, to speak to your other point, I think I've gotten really into the idea of just sort of being as multidisciplinary as possible. I mean, there's ideas and philosophies and ways of doing things you can bring from anywhere else. It doesn't have to be from within clinical research.
Mm-hmm.
That's how, progress is made, by sort of synthesizing all that stuff together and ending up with the best of all worlds.
Yes. And then the interesting thing about what you just said, which is just absolutely 100% correct, is when you're closed off to other individuals, especially when they're not in your industry, you literally lose information that will be beneficial to you. And I've had some people tell me that, okay, well, so-and-so person is not the best person for me to speak with about what I need. But the reality is there's more than one way to do a certain thing. So if you're trying one way and it's not working, don't cut off a potential person who can give you information as to how to make it work because they're from a different industry or they're not you. And then the other assumption that I've always had to contend with, or I see people really just go astray by executing is they think they know it all. And it's like, if they don't know it, then it's not, there's no way of knowing it. But again, marriage has to engage others.
Right. Well, yeah, that's always been
it's bizarre.
That's always been a fascinating concept to me, is the Dunning-Kruger effect, which,
Mm-hmm.
basically the less you know, the more you think you know, and generally the more you know, the more you realize that you don't know.
Yes, that's literally right. It's one of my most recent sayings that I've started adopting is I don't know. So it's more of, hey, I have to start listening to other people, even on topics that I do know. Is the more you know, the more you realize, oh my God, I really don't know.
Well, yeah, and that's just it. I think if you come to things with sort of an open curiosity and you are genuinely curious, I mean, you don't even have to like the person you're listening to, but you can still walk away with something useful out of that conversation or whatever the media is. But you've just got to be open to it in the first place. That's all it takes.
Yes. And you hit another important tip that people need to be aware of and conscious of is being open-minded. So I'm a Christian, and that's one of the other things that I do to keep myself just focused, especially with all that I have to do in my profession and otherwise, is just keeping myself spiritually and mentally just healthy. And one of my favorite books, I am a Christian, by the way, one of my favorite books is the Bible. And one of the scriptures in there talks about being able to just be open-minded in the sense that you have to have the mindset of a child. And if you think about it clearly, when you tell a child something, they hold on to it like it's golden. You cannot, if you're the parents especially, or someone that they look up to in any manner, fashion, or form, you tell them a thing, they will listen to it. When they don't know anything, they will come ask you. When they do know something and you tell them otherwise, you can literally see them struggle, but then after a while, they will adopt what you've just told them. So that whole mindset of keeping an open mind and just listening to other opinions and other people's testimony and experiences other than yours definitely helps you be a better, well-rounded individual.
No, I could not agree more. Be an open book. I think there's a good lesson there.
Oh yeah.
Well, Jeslyn, thank you so much for coming on. It's really been one of my favorite conversations. I'd love to have you back on and go in more depth.
Yes. Thank you for having me, and I would love to come back.
Absolutely. Where can people find you online?
So I am personally on LinkedIn. That will be the best place to reach me on LinkedIn. You can find me Jesyln Atanu on LinkedIn. For my company, in terms of for research sites who need to help with patient recruitment and retention, as well as those who really just want to learn more about clinical research, you can find HTex Clinical on both Facebook and LinkedIn by the name of the company, HTex Clinical.
Okay, and we'll make sure we'll post a link in the show notes. Jeslyn, thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you. Definitely was a pleasure. And again, thank you for the Note to File for doing this. It's definitely well needed in the industry. And I bravely speak on behalf of all of the clinical researchers who you've been a blessing and help to. Thank you for doing Note to File. It's truly a blessing.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
As always, thank you for listening to the Note to File podcast. Please check us out at notetofilepodcast.com for full episode transcripts, show notes, and contact information for our guests. Thanks again.